Hello and welcome to this quiet corner of the internet. We are going to spend some quality time together, but first I would like to know, which country of the world are you from, and what time is it where you live? Let me know in the comments. There is something magical about people from all over the world sharing stories together. Also, don't hesitate to like and subscribe. It's free and will help me a lot. Thank you so much for your support. Alright. Now let's dive in. Truth Without a Guardian, by Alex Wynn Ashwood. 1. The Whisper Beneath the Sycamore. The gardens still belonged to the night when Meryt slipped into them. Cool air clung to the skin like damp linen, heavy with the mingled scents of lotus blossoms, damp earth, and the faintest hint of last night's incense drifting from the palace shrines. Dew silvered the leaves of the pomegranate trees, and the grass beneath her sandals sighed softly with each step. Somewhere, beyond the garden walls, the city of Thebes was stirring, first the bleat of a goat, then the low, rhythmic beat of a potter's wheel, but here, within the queen's marble-walled haven, the day had not yet dared to break. She moved with the silent confidence of one who had long ago mapped every path between the servants' quarters and the outer gardens. The guards at the northern gate would not notice her absence. She had timed her errands, as always, to the space between their shifts. Not that she should be doing this at all. Foolish, whispered the voice in her head, the one that sounded irritatingly like her Uncle Panassi when he'd caught her sneaking figs as a child. But her heart paid no heed. Ahead, the great sycamore rose in the half-light, a gnarled elder among the younger plantings, its roots twisting out of the earth like the backs of crocodiles. Its branches spread in a broad, protective canopy, casting a shadow that seemed to drink the moonlight whole. Beneath it, a figure leaned against the trunk, tall, broad-shouldered, arms folded in that maddeningly casual way he had, as though he hadn't been scanning the garden for her every heartbeat. Nacked. Her pace slowed, a dozen thoughts jostling for dominance, joy at the sight of him, irritation at the trouble he could get her into, relief that he was safe this morning. And under it all, the quickened beat of something dangerous, something that felt far more thrilling than it had any right to. "You're late," he said as she reached the edge of the sycamore's shadow. Meryt tilted her head, fighting the curve of a smile. "Perhaps you came early." He made a noise halfway between a laugh and a huff. "I've been here long enough to count the ants marching up that route 3 times over." "Then you've wasted your morning," she said lightly, stepping closer. The scent of him, warm skin, faint leather, and the dust of the training yard brushed against her, sending an unexpected shiver up her spine. "And if a captain finds you here?" "He won't." His eyes, dark as polished basalt, glinted in the dimness. "I'd hear him before he came close." "You forget, my ears work as well as yours." "Not possible," she murmured, before she could stop herself. Her gaze darted around the garden, scanning for movement. A kitchen boy hurrying to fetch water, 2 gardeners bending over a bed of lilies, their heads together in conversation. None near enough to see the slight way Nakt's fingers brushed hers as he shifted his stance. They never lingered long, never risked too much. It was enough, more than enough, to steal these moments before duty claimed them. "You always know things before anyone else," he said after a pause, watching her with that steady way that sometimes unnerved her. "The gossip before the gossip even begins. How do you do it?" She shrugged, glancing past him to the curling roots of the sycamore. "People talk. I listen. That's all." She allowed herself a small smirk. "And sometimes, I ask the right question at the right time. Or the wrong one, if I want the truth faster. His lips quirked. You should have been born a scribe. And spend my life scratching reeds across papyrus for some fat nobleman? She made a dismissive sound. No, thank you. Besides, a scribe can be replaced. But a servant who knows things. She let the thought trail off, savoring the flicker of amusement in his eyes. Somewhere deep in the palace, a conch horn sounded the soft, measured note that marked the servant's morning shift change. Meryt's stomach tightened. Soon, the corridors would be crowded, and her absence might be noticed. She looked up at him, committing his face to memory, the line of his jaw, the faint scar along his forearm, the way the dawn's first light painted his skin in gold. I should go, she said. His hand brushed hers again, deliberate this time. One more moment. A risk, she thought, but one she was already taking. She lingered, the garden around them holding its breath. Dawn began to assemble itself with the careful fussiness of a palace scribe laying out a fresh sheet of papyrus, pale lines first, then the colored borders. Light threaded through the lace of the sycamore leaves and slipped down the gnarled bark, striping Nakt's forearms and the front of Meryt's linen shift. A low breeze stirred, carrying the pond's sweetness, lotus and the sharp green of crushed papyrus stalks, and also the far less poetic aroma of the stable court. The gods, she thought, had a sense of humor broad enough to embrace both frankincense and donkey. Your new posting still holds, she asked, because there were only so many heartbeats they could squander on staring and pretending it wasn't staring. For now, he said. His voice came quiet, the sound of a millstone turning a patient noise, but able to grind grain to dust. South corridor near the gallery of minor gods. Boring as dry bread. Dry bread could be life or death, depending on whether you had any to begin with. Boring is good, she said. Boring means no captains notice you. Boring means you keep all your teeth. She angled a look up at him, unable to stop the dry smile. Boring means I don't have to bribe anyone to visit you in the infirmary. He huffed that almost laugh again. Save your copper rings. I prefer to be visited whole. A pair of white egrets lifted from the reed bed, legs trailing as if the Nile itself still tugged at them. Over the western wall the sky shifted from bruised violet to the faintest bread dough color, and already the city sounded different. The flat clack of a baker slapping loaves, a woman calling a child by all three of his names, the squeal of a cart axle that should have been greased months ago. The gardeners, those quiet kings of the morning, glided from bed to bed with bronze sickles and watering jars balanced against their hips. One of them, a wiry man with a loop of dried dates tied to his belt, glanced their way. Meryt let her hands fall to her sides, straightened the tuck of her sash, and made her face an obedient blank. Servant and guard, nothing to see here but rules being followed. Nakt shifted so that his body, tall and broad, made a shelter between her and the path. The gesture, so habit, so unthinking, sent a small warm ache through her chest. Ridiculous. She was not some weakling who swooned when a man stepped between her and a draught. But the ache did not consult her pride before it took up residence. You have satire again this morning, he asked. Meryt fought an eye roll that would have been undignified enough to be noticed from the roof of Karnak. Lady Satire, she corrected primly, because the world demanded titles be fed and watered like expensive geese. Yes. I will probably spend 3 hours reminding her that gold beads and lapis beads are not the same blue, and that the gods will not strike her dead if her perfume cone leans slightly to the left. The gods are busy, he said, deadpan. Truly. They have better things to do than watch the tilt of scented fat on an ambitious woman's head. A beat. Though if they could be persuaded to trip her once in a while, pure accident, of course. He coughed to hide a smile, and the motion brought them closer by a fraction. The rough weave of his guard's kilt brushed her bare knee, nothing, really, the sort of nothing that left her skin remembering the touch long after the touch had ended. She felt a tiny spark catch in her ribs and pretended not to notice it. Not here. Not ever, if she were sensible. She was sensible often, disastrously so, which explained why she had not been caught for any of the interesting things she had done. Sensible did not, however, appear to be winning this particular argument with her pulse. Along the tiled path, a palace steward swayed by, counting under his breath as he checked the rows of potted mandrake and fenugreek set out for the kitchens. His lips moved, his fingers tapped the hollow of his wrist. 1, 2, 3. A scribe trailed behind with a tablet and reed pen, already ink-stained, already frowning. It would be a day of tallies and scoldings. It always was when the steward emerged at sunrise. The steward's eye snagged on them, slid away, returned, a fish testing a net. Meryt dipped in a small, neat bow, the kind that proclaimed obedience while saying absolutely nothing. Nacht didn't move, he didn't need to. His stillness was the kind that reassured superiors. Everything is under control because I am standing here, stone among reeds. The steward flicked 2 fingers in a gesture that could have meant go on with it or I didn't see you if anyone asks. Either suited Meryt. She eased a breath past her teeth, slow enough to pass for calm. The new perfume shipment? Nacht asked, as if they were discussing weather. From Punt. Or from a man who swears by his grandmother's Ka that it is from Punt and not the marsh a mile south. She let her mouth curve. Satire will wrinkle her nose and call it too animal, which means she will wear twice as much. He tilted his head. What does too animal smell like? Musk and myrrh, and the sort of money that convinces everyone to call musk and myrrh the will of the gods. She remembered the small alabaster jars, swaddled in rushes, how their translucent walls trapped light like honey. She remembered, too, the way the unguent inside had woken something low in her belly, a warmth, a sense of stepping into a pool that was deeper than it looked. She had capped the jar and told herself sternly that smells were tricks, and that she was not a goat to be led by a cone of scented fat. Then she had reopened it, just to be sure. You'll be careful, he said, bringing her back, as he always did, to the point that mattered. Around Satire. She likes to pull wings off. Flies, Meryt finished, though she suspected he meant something larger than flies. I know how to buzz in her ear without getting caught in her fingers. A beat. Besides, give me a week and I will know where she keeps her love letters. He glanced down at her, amused and a little alarmed. You joke about dangerous things. Everything is dangerous in a palace, she said lightly. Even the bread can break a tooth. Then, because she could not stop herself when the door cracked open even an inch, the priests were whispering yesterday. Near the north colonnade. I carried linens, they carried outrage. Something about the Queen's new decree and Amun's patience. Nacht's mouth flattened. You always know things before anyone else, he repeated softly, the words not teasing now but an observation laid like a linen bandage across a cut. It isn't only gossip. It's threads. You hold them. Threads make nets, she said. Nets catch fish. Fish feed families. She did not add, threads also strangle. Because once you pull at the wrong one, the whole cloth can tighten in the wrong place. I listen. That is all. It was not all. Listening had turned into understanding, and understanding had turned into a habit that felt uncomfortably like compulsion. She could not pass a closed door without hearing the hiss of voices like steam escaping. She could not watch a servant flinch when a certain name was spoken and not wonder who held the leash. For a moment, she saw herself from above, small in the lattice of garden paths, her life a knot of roots she had memorized, and beyond them, larger paths, the corridors of power, where she would never be allowed to walk as anything other than a shadow. Sometimes I wish you were less brave, Nacht said, and the dryness in his tone could not salt the softness in the words. Sometimes I wish you were uglier, she shot back, too quickly. It would save me trouble. He looked properly surprised, and then he laughed, an honest laugh, low and bright. It jumped in her chest like a fish in a basket. I'll ask the gods to spoil my face. They're busy, remember. She grinned, then smoothed the expression away because footsteps approached, the quick patter of a junior acolyte's sandals. A boy bareheaded, a strip of linen thrown over one shoulder, jogged past with a clay jar hugged to his chest, the sharp clean scent of natron powder shaking loose from his skin. Purification water for the temple, most likely. The priests would be stepping into the sacred lake now, shivering into sanctity as the sun pushed up between the pylons. The boy's eyes flicked left, right. He saw them and didn't, the way children did when they were too full of tasks to be curious. Meryt let him go, then shifted closer to the tree's trunk, thumb smoothing an old scar in the bark. Nacht reached past her to touch the same place, no, to touch her hand where it lay on the scar, big fingers covering her smaller ones for a heartbeat too long. It was nothing. It was everything. It slammed through her like the first sip of beer when she'd been too long in the killroom heat. She could have leaned into that touch until the bark pressed patterns into her back and the world spun down to the square of space between them. She could have forgotten the gardeners, the steward, the smug little egrets who were absolutely watching from the lotus pool. She didn't. She let his hand go, because letting go now might mean not letting go later when it would matter more. You should be seen, she said, practical and bitter and fond, a braid of feelings that had no business being plaited together. In the right place. So that when someone asks if you were at your post at sunrise, for people can say, oh yes, and he looked as bored as a tomb door. He made a face of theatrical misery. I'll look bored. You excel at it, she said. It's one of the things I admire about you. Truly. He leaned down, turning his head so his mouth nearly brushed the coil of hair that had slipped from her scarf. And here I thought it was my ears you admired. Her voice went thinner than she liked. Your ears are adequate. The sun broke at last, gold coin over the eastern wall. The shadows of the colonnade stretched like long fingers across the lawn. With the light came the change in temperature, subtle, but definite, as if the air had been a cloak and someone folded it back. Bees warmed themselves on the sycamore bark and then began hard work with the zeal of scribes newly promoted. In the far court, a pair of trumpets gave their brassy cry, the royal wake signal, the one that said, "The Queen rises, therefore the city does too." Duty unfurled itself like a decree. Meryt tugged her scarf forward so that it framed her face just so, the way a modest girl's scarf should. It would not fool people who knew her, but it would keep strangers' eyes sliding off her like oil off polished wood. I have to bring Satire her mirrors, she said. She will pretend she forgot to ask for the polished copper one, and I will present it at the exact moment she lays a hand on her hair so she can feel obeyed without having commanded. She wrinkled her nose. Court is a play. Most of us are scenery. You, he said, low, are the actor everyone watches when they think they're watching the Queen. She snorted. Flatter me before I've had beer, will you? It isn't flattery if it's true. A beat. Meryt. She could not bear the way he said her name sometimes. How it made her feel like a full cup placed on an uneven table on the verge of spilling, not yet, but any jolt. He reached into the small leather pouch at his waist and produced a sliver of something wrapped in linen. Not a lover's token, he was not foolish enough for that. He held it as if it might bite. I found this near the south parapet last night, he said. Probably nothing, some boy's trinket. But it's faience, the good kind, and the glaze is broken. I've seen similar beads on the belts of the temple scribes. He shrugged, apologetic. You like threads. Here's one. She took it, careful not to let their fingers linger this time. The shard felt cool and slick though the morning had warmed. When she turned it, a flash of deep, water-bright blue winked and was gone. Even broken, it had been shaped in the form of a tiny wedgeat eye, the eye that saw, the eye that protected. Well then. The gods had sense of humor and a taste for comment. I'll ask around, she said, tucking the shard into the seam of her sash, where a fold would keep it from falling. Casually. Casually, he echoed, because he knew that when she said casually she meant carefully, and when she said carefully she meant with the tenacity of a crocodile. The gardeners had moved closer, the steward was making his return circuit, a little cloud of annoyed gnats trailing him in the form of junior attendants. Between the sycamore and the lily bed, a pair of court women drifted like painted barges, hair weighted with gold beads that chimed faintly when they turned their heads. Satire was not among them, thank all minor gods, but their presence meant that satire could not be far. Meryt pulled her shoulders into modest lines and took a single deliberate step backward, out from under the sycamore's shadow. Go, she said, and her voice behaved. Be as dull as a brick. I will see you when the world has tired of itself. He didn't move. He looked at her as if there were something he ought to say that would not be safe to say here, or anywhere. Then he did the most dangerous thing of the morning, nothing. He only inclined his head a soldier's acknowledgement, public as sunlight, and turned away at last, the leather of his sandals creaking lightly over the tile. She let herself watch him for 3 steps, 5. Then she made herself not watch at all. The path to Satira's chambers ran along the lotus pool. Koi stirred the water, their mouths opening like surprised old men. Dragonflies scribbled bright commas in the air. In her mind she arranged the day, mirrors first, then the beaded wig, then the question about whether the lady preferred the gold-capped sandal straps or the ivory. In between those tasks, room for 3 short conversations, one with the laundry girl who tended the priest's linen, God's bless unnoticed hands, one with the old porter at the north staircase, who saw everything without appearing to see, and one with the scullery boy whose ears were big enough to catch wind. Her fingers brushed the faience shard at her waist. A blue eye, broken. She snorted, soft enough to be a private joke. If the gods were sending omens, they could at least send whole ones. Though perhaps that was the point, seeing required piecing fragments together. Nothing ever came whole to the lowly, except trouble. She passed through a wash of sunlight where the colonnade opened and had to squint. The white limestone of the palace glittered like fresh fish scales. Across the courtyard, a servant carrying a bundle of garments tripped, swore, then glanced around in fear that someone had heard. A cat observed this with the cold survey of a vizier. From a distant room came the soft rattle of a sistrum, then the muttered thump of a drum, morning offerings. Hatshepsut, Martcare, beloved of Amun, would be wrapped in the day's rituals soon, and courtiers would begin their elegant lies. Meryt's mouth bowed in a smile that had very little to do with delight. Elegant lies, clumsy ones, lies with gold rings on their fingers and lies with dirt under their nails, she knew the smells of them all. The wind shifted, she caught leather, sweat, the acid breath of someone who had drunk too much beer before dawn. Guards changing out, a captain barking, someone laughing too loudly. She didn't need to turn to know Nakt would have slid into that flow as if he were made of water. Girl, a woman's voice snapped from ahead, the exact tone of someone who had never once in her life had to run to catch a corridor before a captain counted heads. Where are my mirrors? Meryt tucked the scatter of thoughts into neat piles, the way she folded linens, corners to corners, edge to edge. She turned toward the voice, already fitting herself into the shape of a servant whose mind held nothing more dangerous than the difference between ivory and bone. But under the linen of her shift, under the neat fold of her scarf, something quick and cool and blue watched with her. Threads, she told herself. Nets. Fish. Feed a family, feed a future. Do not drown in your own weaving. She went to the Lady Satire with the mirrors and the honeyed smile she kept for women who liked to be obeyed, and behind her, beneath the sycamore's spreading arms, the bee-hum morning began its true, relentless song. The corridor that led from the gardens to the women's chambers kept the cool of night like a miser with his last coin. Painted blue stars marched over the ceiling. On the floor, marsh birds waded forever in painted water, their red beaks hunting painted fish. Meryt stepped carefully so her sandals wouldn't squeak on the limestone. There was a trick to it, a sideways roll of the foot learned the same year she learned to carry a jug on her head without slopping half the Nile down her back. She could feel the sun sauntering up behind the walls, yet the palace interior pretended it was still dawn. Palaces lied most politely in the mornings. 2 housemaids passed with baskets of laundered linen pressed into pleats sharp enough to cut a finger. They smelled of wet flax and soapwort. A third girl, younger, scurried after them with an armful of reed fans and the pinched look of someone who had already dropped one important thing today and was determined not to drop a second. Mind your elbows, Meryt murmured as they brushed, because elbows, like tongues, had a way of causing trouble when they forgot their place. Satyra's antechamber opened like a gold-lined mouth. Ebony stools with ivory inlay stood in a precise row, their legs carved as the legs of geese, breathlessly elegant and entirely unsittable for anyone who had ever scrubbed a floor. Perfume cones waited in shallow alabaster dishes, pale domes of scented fat studded with flakes of myrrh and blue lotus petals. Somewhere a sistrum chattered, somewhere closer a cat thumped onto a cushion and made a show of not caring who saw. The cat's collar was blue faience with a scratch on the second bead from the clasp, blue like the shard warming now against Meryt's hip. A silly thing to notice. The mind fetched the strangest tidbits and presented them like offerings. See, this is important, probably. Where have you been? Satyra's voice did not rise. It descended, like a silk curtain falling to cover an altar. She stood before a polished copper mirror, hairboat, one of those elaborate wigs the noblewomen, gods love them, called natural, propped on a cedar stand. Her real hair lay plastered against her skull with oil, bound in a thin net. She had a face that could have been carved yesterday from a block of limestone, clean planes, a nose like a jackal's profile, mouth made for secrets. Coal darkened her eyes so they looked like cut almonds. She was taller than Meryt by half a head and knew exactly how to use height the way a captain used rank. "With your mirrors, my lady," Meryt said, and set her tray on a table carved with lotus and bound captives, the usual charming motif. She kept her head tilted in that deferential angle that made the world assume there was nothing but air behind her eyes. From here she could see the room reflected in the mirror's hammered surface, satire upright, gleam slanting up her throat. Behind her, a servant girl fanning with all the intensity of a priest at festival. Further back, an open door to a balcony where the garden's green crept in like gossip. "The polished one," Satire said, without looking. "If it is scratched I will have the smith whipped. They swore to me that they used river sand from the first bend north of the quarry." "Yes," Meryt finished, holding out the mirror as one offers an infant to a woman who has clearly never held one. "I saw the man's hands. They were ruined enough to convince me." She dared half an eyelash of a smile. "And he was too ugly to be a liar." Satira's eyes met hers in the copper circle only for a breath, but enough. "You are impertinent," she said, which was court speak for "I will allow this because it amuses me and I am pretending amusement is the reason. I am thorough, my lady. Thorough is a poor cousin to obedient. I have found that obedience and thoroughness can be cousins who don't speak, my lady." "Shut up, Meryt. Do not teach vipers how to bite." Satire lifted the mirror and turned, testing angles. Light clung to her like tame honey. "The Queen receives petitions today," she said, the words casual and therefore heavy. "The hall will be full of men who think they can still the river by telling it their names." "The river listens to no one," Meryt said, "because sometimes honesty costs less than flattery. It tolerates us if we feed it." "Oh!" Satire looked amused again. "And what do you feed a river, little servant from nowhere?" "Offerings," Meryt said. "Bread. Beer. The truth, occasionally. Bread and beer for the living, truth for the gods." She had learned it at her mother's knee, before illness took the woman's breath like a thief in the linen store. Satire smiled with only one side of her mouth. "A dangerous diet." She sat, and her body servant, Henut, fat with importance, stepped in to lift the wig from its stand and lower it onto Satira's oiled skull. The weight of hair changed Satira's posture. Nobility had a way of getting heavier the more gold it wore. Henut adjusted the braids, cradled a Meryt necklace in her palms, let the strings of blue-green faience beads settle with a hiss against Satira's collarbones. The counterpoise thunked between her shoulder blades. Ether's rattle of blessings, if you believed in jewelry that worked as hard as priests said it did. "Paint," Satire said, and Henut reached for the coal pot. Galena glittered dull and dark in the little stone jar. The coal stick had a handle carved in the shape of a fish. Everything rich people touched wanted to be something else. Henut drew the black line, slow as a scribe writing the name of a god. Satire did not blink. "You will stay out of the audience hall," Satire said to the mirror, which delivered the message to Meryt quite efficiently. "I do not want the bustle of servants making me hot. I will go when the Queen moves. Until then I will be still." Still, Meryt thought, like a cobra in a basket. "Yes, my lady." Satire reached without looking and let her fingers rest on the nearest of the alabaster dishes. The perfume cone within had begun to soften in the heat of the room. The scent rose, green an animal, a little sweet, a little dirty, like the breath of a lioness after she'd eaten figures. Satire wrinkled her nose, the exact amount allowed to a woman who wished to be thought discerning. "This is the new batch from Punt," Meryt said blandly, and was duly pleased to see the barely-there flicker run through Satira's eyes at the name. Punt glittered in palace talk like a fish on a festival platter, half real, half story, all expensive. Or from a marsh where a man tells his grandmother's ka it is Punt, she added in her head, but aloud, "Yes, my lady. The traders say the Myr came on a ship with leopard skins and ebony and a dwarf who can dance on a drum." Satira's lip curved again. "Traders say many things. The dwarf was likely taller than I am." Her fingers left the cone. A glossy trace clung to them. She raised them to her nose, breathed. "Too animal." Of course it was. Which meant it was exactly the kind she would wear, doubled. Meryt kept her face as smooth as the copper. "Shall I bring the lotus blend?" she asked. "The blue is gentler." "The blue is provincial," Satire said, which was a polite court synonym for weak. Then, almost idly, "I passed 2 priests of Khonsu in the North Colonnade last night. They walked like men who had eaten sour figures." Perhaps they had, Meryt said, because she had not yet earned the right to let her eyes sharpen at the word Khonsu. "The kitchens had a bad basket yesterday." Satira's glance flicked to the balcony where the green day brightened like water poured into a bronze bowl. "They do not hide dislike anymore, some of them. They should remember who raised these walls." Her hand, perfectly weighted with gold, gestured toward the painted ceiling as if Hatshepsut herself were a line of pigment. "A woman who builds temples is still a woman to those who prefer their gods male." It was as much politics as Satire would ever say aloud in front of a servant. It was, nevertheless, a great deal. Meryt tucked it away the way she tucked a coin into a seam. "I will remind the kitchen to sort the figs more carefully," she murmured, and felt the inward curl of her own smile. Figs. Yes, delicious little fig rinds of information. A shadow in the doorway, the room cooled the smallest degree. Parhamnetja's acolyte, Meryt recognized the boy's narrow shoulders and shaved head, stood with his hands flat on his thighs, a stiff papyrus folded under one arm. He did not enter. Sensible child. Satire saw him in the mirror and allowed her gaze to travel slowly to the door, obliging him to feel the distance. "What is it?" "A note from the," he swallowed, remembering that lesser throats were not meant to carry sacred names into secular rooms. "From the temple, my lady." "Leave it." She did not turn. The boy crossed the threshold like a ghost and set the folded papyrus on the stool carved like a goose. Meryt caught a breath of resin and soot. Fresh ink, then. The temples were awake and writing. When the boy had gone, Satire lifted the papyrus without touching it, an art, and nodded her chin at Meryt. "Open it." Meryt broke the clay lump with her thumbnail. The seal held a little eye, the wedjat, so tiny you would need a better morning and better light to admire it properly. Or the kind of attention that made a life troublesome. She unrolled the note enough to read the first lines, then lowered her gaze. As if words might leap off and brand her forehead with knowledge she had no right to. "A blessing in the name of Khonsu, my lady," she murmured. "The High One prays that your health is robust." Robust. An odd word to send a woman famous for skipping meals to keep her hips narrow. "He hopes you will attend the small service this afternoon. A dedication for the safekeeping of the Queen's house." Satyra's eyes tilted, considering whether to be pleased or amused. Safekeeping, she repeated softly, doing that thing where she held a word up to the light to see whether it had cracks. How devout they are when it suits. Shall I send her answer? Meryt asked. We could say you are seized by a headache caused by the sun. The priests like headaches. They make women obedient. Satyra's laugh was small and edged. No. I will attend. Tell them I am humbled by their concern. Humbled, Meryt. It will choke them like a fish bone. Meryt bowed her head to hide the grin that slipped out before she could leash it. Yes, my lady. Humbled to the floor. Not to the floor, Satyra said. Let them see I know what the floor is for. She rose. A servant scuttled with sandals, polished so bright the thongs reflected the roof stars. Satyra placed her feet on the footstool carved with foreign enemies' Asiatic noses, Libyan braids, Nubian tattoos, then stepped down as if trampling the world were both duty and exercise. Bring the lotus, Satyra said suddenly, surprising Meryt. The blue. Not for me. She glanced toward the balcony again. For the room. The day smells. Busy. Busy. That was one word for it. Meryt turned to the chest where the cones lay wrapped in cloth and chose one that held more flower than musk. She set it in the little brazier on the balcony and coaxed a coal with the bellows until a thread of fragrance wandered out to meet the morning. The garden's sounds floated up, refined by distance. Bee hum tightened to a lyre's string, gardener's murmurs smoothed to river water. From here, if she leaned, she could see the curve of the sycamore's canopy like a green hide stretched taut on a frame. Its shadow had shrunk to a dark island around the trunk. The grass sparkled where the dew lost its last argument with the sun. A guard moved along the path beyond. Not Nacht, another man, stockier, his step too loud. Good. Better that she did not see Nacht now. Better that her chest not attempt that ridiculous lifting trick when it recognized the shape of him. She was a mind, not a loose bundle of strings, however much her body sometimes disagreed. Do you watch the trees for entertainment, Meryt? Satyra's voice drifted out, mild. Only as a hobby, my lady, she said, and drew back from the rail. I also collect reflections. She gestured to the mirror, and Satyra's mouth tugged in spite of itself. You collect too many things. One day your hands will be too full to run. Satyra turned her head so Henut could anchor the wig with invisible pins. I will dress alone now. Go and tell the steward I require the pearl pins back from the woman who borrowed them last night and forgot to return them. She looked like a gull with a fish stuck in its throat. I will, Meryt said. She tucked the temple note back into its curl and set it within reach. And the priests? Tell the messenger boy I am humbled, Satyra said, tasting the word again. And tell him to be sure the temple writes that down. Their scribes adore the appearance of humility. Yes, my lady. I will tell the boy. He will nod so hard his ears slap his head. The temple will write the word with a reed that has bitten a dozen others. And in the space between the strokes of the letters, the truth will squirm like a fish. She gathered the empty trays and turned. As she did, her fingers grazed the faience shard through the linen at her hip. Tiny, harmless, blue. The eye that saw. It felt warm now, warming with her. She wondered which belt had lost it, whose hand had snatched too quickly at a robe, whose hip had brushed a wall in haste. She wondered why it had flaked near the south parapet and not where it ought to have stayed, on some pious scribe's tidy waist. The corridor outside the chamber had woken to full day. Women passed with armfuls of flowers bound into garlands, mandrake and cornflowers and papyrus heads, the palace trying each morning to pretend it was a garden. A boy trotted by with a basket of bread-round loaves stamped with the mark of the royal bakery. The smell hit Meryt in the stomach like love. She had not eaten. The day would gnaw at her if she let it. Down the steps, the painted birds watched her travel back the way she had come, their eyes clever dots of black. By the time she reached the colonnade, the sun had warmed the stone enough to tease heat into her soles. She let herself pass again beneath the slice of sky framed between pillars. It was embarrassing how quickly her gaze slewed toward the sycamore. It stood as it always had, ancient and obliging, a grandmother holding open her shawl. A gardener had laid his sickle against the trunk, a coil of rope dozed in the grass nearby. Rope. Her mind plucked the word like a string. She imagined a ceiling's shadowed belly, the ribwork of beams, the way a rope would whisper when hauled fast. Foolish to imagine anything in particular yet, foolish to feed that part of herself that liked to assemble trouble into the neatness of a story. She dragged her eyes away and set them on the steward crossing the far path, his abacus clicking like beetle wings. "Your pins," she told him when she had him under the shade, no witnesses who mattered, only the ever-present geese looking scandalized. "Lady Satire wants her pearl pins returned. The ones that flew from a gull's throat." The steward's mouth tried not to smile and failed. "Yes, yes," he said. "That one always borrows and never remembers. I will pluck her." He made a show of tapping the abacus. "And you, what are you, Meryt?" "Court scent. I smell lotus." "Devotion," she said serenely. "It clings." He snorted and moved on, counting his way into the next argument. Meryt watched him go, then took the longer way back toward the servants' court, skirting beds of fennel and leeks, the kitchen garden orderly as a page of numbers. The sycamore's shadow lapped at her sandals one last time. She let herself pause within it, just enough to press her palm briefly to the bark where her and Nact's hands had met. A silly blessing, perhaps. Or a promise. The tree didn't care. It had watched lovers and liars for longer than any of them remembered. Its bark was scarred with years and perhaps with the scratches of someone's hidden message, a child's alphabet cut with a blunt knife. She thought, absurdly, if the tree could talk, it would roll its wooden eyes at the dramatics of humans. "Threads," she told the grain under her fingers, sounding, heavens preserve her, like a woman who had decided her life was a loom. "Nets. Fish." The tree, wisely, offered no opinion. She stepped out of the shadow and into the clean bite of sunlight. The blue shard nudged her hip like a reminder. She had Satira's errands to fold, and the steward's plucking to watch for later gossip, and a temple boy to send humming humility down the halls. She had a guard to not look at, a name to not say aloud, a pulse to bridle. And she had a day to survive in a palace where every fragrance covered something that stank, and every mirror showed you only the angle you held it at. She smiled, thin and private. If the gods wanted to test her, they could at least make the questions difficult. These were easy ones. Be small, be sharp, be everywhere without being seen. From the far side of the garden, a trumpet coughed, "Practice, not proclamation." Meryt turned her face toward the sound and walked on, linen whispering, sandals patient, her thoughts a bright, troublesome skein. The sycamore let her go without comment, as grandmothers do. The day picked up its skirts and ran.